Today I'm going to talk about the 5 steps you can take to lose visceral fat effectively. So, everyone wants to lose harmful extra fat, not just for vanity reasons, although vanity is an important thing, but you want to lose extra fat for health reasons. And this is what we're going to talk about, the harms of extra fat that harms your health. Now, this is what we call visceral fat. And I need to explain to you that there's different types of fat in the body. Visceral fat's one of them. But fat is something that we naturally react to when we think about even the word fat. It makes us kind of feel uncomfortable, right? When you step out of the shower and you step on the scale, that number isn't the number that you were hoping for. You kind of curse yourself and you go, I got to lose some weight. I got to get rid of some of this fat. If you look out of the corner of your eye in the mirror at your naked body and you see a lump or a bump that doesn't belong there, you go, man, I gotta lose some weight, okay? Even in the grocery store, when you go by the meat counter, I don't care if you're a vegan or a vegetarian, you're gonna be passing by that section. If you see a big ribeye steak with a big, thick rind of fat, it automatically goes, ugh, I hope nobody's gonna buy that, right? Okay, so body fat is something that we naturally react to in very visceral sort of ways. Visceral just means gut. We've got a gut feeling about it. But fat itself isn't bad. And so what I want to do before we talk about the 5 ways to lose visceral fat, I want to talk a little bit about the whole nature of body fat. Body fat is actually incredibly important. It's the first tissue that forms in your body after your circulation. So basically when your dad's sperm met your mom's egg and you were just a ball of cells, you started to form tissues and organs. Your blood vessels form, your circulation forms, because every organ needs a circulation. Your nerves form near your blood vessels. They track right along. It's kind of like telephone lines around your blood vessels, because you need electrical circuits around your organs through your nerves. And then fat forms really early, and fat forms right around your blood vessels. All right. So you don't even have a face yet, and you've got body fat forming. So the question is, why does fat form so early, and what does fat actually do? Well, body fat naturally forms around your blood vessels because fat functions as a fuel tank for the body. All right. So when you eat food later on after you're born, whenever you eat food, the nutrients get absorbed into your bloodstream, including the energy, the fuel that we're actually eating. And our body actually stores that fuel into our fat cells like a fuel tank. Just like filling up gasoline in your car, petrol in your car, same deal, except in a human body, it's stored in fat, in body fat. Even though we kind of recoil at the idea of fat as a general rule, in fact, fat is actually absolutely important in our body. How do we know this? Well, we know that fat is not only acts as a cushion. We didn't have body fat, okay? We had no body fat. Besides the fact we'd be looking really sickly and skinny. If we didn't have any body fat, if you tripped on the carpet and fell down, your organs would burst open. So fat is a cushion. Fat is a fuel tank, a storage tank for the energy that we eat. Really important. Fat is also a endocrine organ. You heard me correctly. Fat's an actual organ, and as an organ, it produces hormones. Now, among the hormones it produces hormones that regulate our appetite, makes us feel full, etc. Makes us feel hungry. It's sort of a balancing switch. But also there is a hormone made by fat called adiponectin. And adiponectin, and this is going to come back to thinking about fighting visceral fat and why it's been important. But adiponectin is a hormone that's the highest level hormone in your bloodstream. All right. So if you came to my medical office and I drew a tube of your blood and sent it off to the lab and asked the lab to analyze for hormones, I can tell you of all the hormones in your body, adiponectin would come back 1,000 times higher than all the other hormones in your body. It's made by body fat. Now, what does adiponectin do? Adiponectin, made by body fat, okay, actually helps insulin. It collaborates with insulin, works with insulin to be able to make absorbing glucose into your muscles and into your fat more efficient. Absorbing glucose, insulin sensitivity, lowering your blood glucose. That's right, your body fat as an organ, makes a hormone, adiponectin, that helps to bring down glucose so you don't actually have huge amounts of glucose in your body. It makes your metabolism more efficient. So your body fat actually is a cushion, it's a fuel tank, and it's an endocrine organ that actually creates hormones that actually help your metabolism work more efficiently. So we need all these functions. And the types of fat in the body that help to function in all these different ways. There's two kinds of fat. You've got white fat, you've got brown fat. So I want to talk about white fat first. White fat comes in, it's called white because it actually, under the microscope, it actually looks white. And brown fat, under the microscope, actually looks brown. I'm going to talk about brown fat in a minute. But white fat, which looks white, is the kind of fat that's under the skin. It's called subcutaneous fat. So that's the stuff that's underneath the skin. If you have too much white fat, well, that's the fat under your arms. That's a double chin. That is the man boob. That is the muffin top. That is the fat in the thigh. That's fat on the butt. Usually we've got too much subcutaneous fat. That's the stuff you don't want to have. All right. That's white fat. When you actually are worried about it on a vanity level, that's usually because it's accumulated too much subcutaneous fat. Now, there's another place that white fat can develop that's actually inside the tube of your body. Okay, and that's called visceral fat. And it's called visceral fat because viscera means gut. And so visceral fat is fat that grows inside the gut. Now, what are we talking about when we talk about gut? We're talking about a tube. Your body is a tube, right? So if you lay down flat and make a slice, your body's a tube. And I don't really care if you've got a thin tube or a big tube. Doesn't matter what your body type is. You can still have too much visceral fat. You need a little bit in there, but too much visceral fat grows, and fat actually forms like a baseball glove to wrap around your organs. And when you grow too much visceral fat, it's not like hanging over your belt line or your waist like the muffin top. Too much visceral fat literally starts choking off your organs. And because fat requires a blood supply, when you grow fat excessively large and too quickly, what happens is that the growing fat outstrips its blood supply. It can't get enough oxygen or nutrients. It's kind of strangulated. It becomes something called hypoxic. And when the fat becomes oxygen starved because it's growing too quickly for its own blood supply, what happens is that it becomes inflamed. And so when visceral fat grows in the tube of your body, wrapped around your organs, and it's growing too quickly, it becomes inflammatory fat. And inflamed visceral fat around your organs is a very, very dangerous thing. It's actually associated with increased risk of metabolic syndrome, diabetes, some forms of cancer, like at least a dozen different forms of cancer: breast cancer, pancreatic cancer, colon cancer, uterine cancer, lots of different types of cancer. It's also associated with obesity. It's also associated with dementia. So too much visceral fat causes huge problems for your health. It's a setup for a chronic disease, and partly is because it becomes a source of inflammation. It's kind of like a wildfire that's raging inside your body. So too much visceral fat, actually really, really dangerous. And this is, by the way, going back to the topic of this video, which is that what are the steps that you can take to fight visceral fat? Now remember, white fat could be under the skin, subcutaneous fat. We don't like it usually when there's too much on a cosmetic level or on a vanity level. But when you have too much fat inside your tube, that's visceral fat, well, now that sets up for a very dangerous situation. In fact, I mentioned it doesn't matter if you have a thin tube or a big tube. If you have a thin tube, that's called skinny fat, and you might have heard about this. So, this has been studied in men and women, but especially in women who are apparently thin. That actually becomes a problem if you grow too much visceral fat on the inside. They call it TOFI, T-O-F-I. That's thin on the outside, fat on the inside. That's not an insult. That's a fact. All right. And again, that puts you at the risk for type 2 diabetes, increases your risk for heart disease and different types of cancer and even dementia. And in fact, there was a study of women, almost 3,000 women who had normal BMI. They looked okay, they looked normal on the outside, but they had body scans to show that they had high amounts of visceral fat, and they followed them over a number of years. And this is a study done at Weill Cornell Medical Center, and they found that women who were skinny fat had a twofold increase in the risk of developing breast cancer. All right. And so this is, cancer is triggered and fueled by inflammation. And this is one of the side effects, negative, harmful side effects that you would actually get with excess visceral fat. So good news is that you can lose that harmful visceral fat, and I'm going to tell you how. And that's what this video is all about. All right. So we talked about how fat forms a normal role of actually fat, how fat is a cushion, a fuel tank, an endocrine organ that produces critical hormones that you need for a good metabolism. But what happens is when you overeat, eat too many calories, have too much fuel in your body, all right? That's like overfilling your gas tank in your car. Now, at a gas station, when you're filling up your car, when the tank is full, it'll click on the gas, the fuel nozzle, and then no more gas will come up. But imagine if you didn't have a clicker. Our body, we don't have a clicker, right? So we can keep on eating, keep on eating, keep on eating. Very easy to overeat. And when we overeat, we're putting too much fuel in our body. Now, what happens in a car when you overload on fuel? Well, the gas will come right out of the tank, run down the side of the car, run down the sides of the tires, pool around your feet. And guess what? Then you're standing in a pool of something that's a dangerous, flammable, toxic mess, right? Very dangerous if that actually happens to you, okay? Now, what happens in the body when you overflow your fuel tank? Well, you got too much fat, and because our fuel tank in a car is rigid, made out of metal, a fuel tank in our body is fat, it stretches. In fact, every fat cell can stretch 3 times. Like we mentioned, a balloon that can actually blow up 3 times its size. That's a fat cell. So you're eating and eating, the fat's going to load up. You overeat, well, you're going to fill up to the brim, and now you're going to fill up the next fat cell, fill that one up, and the next one, fill that one up, and the next one, and fill that one up, and so on and so forth. So you can kind of see how body fat, white fat, visceral fat can easily expand, all right? Now you're running out of fat. Guess what? You're still eating. You have stem cells in your fat that can create more fat. You can create more fuel tanks that can blow up 3 times the size, and then make some more, blow up 3 times the size. So now you can kind of see how you can add up that fat. That's just how you create that baseball glove, the visceral fat that strangles your organs and becomes inflammatory. That's simply put how to think about what happens when you overeat, okay? Now, normally when you're eating, you're actually exercising and moving, and just to run your body, you need some basal metabolism. You're going to burn some fuel. But think about it. We live in a society of where we're surrounded by abundance, and we tend to overeat. That's one of probably the biggest problems. Health problems is just frankly just putting too much fuel in our body, filling our tanks because it's there, because we're not actually controlling the amount we're actually eating. And when we overfill our tanks, we actually quickly go into this whole overloading of the visceral fat, setting up for body inflammation, setting up for chronic disease, metabolic syndrome. Our metabolism goes haywire. By the way, when that visceral fat becomes inflamed, guess what it does? It knocks out the function of the hormone, the adiponectin. That hormone that I told you is 1,000 times higher than all the other hormones in your body, okay, gets derailed. And when adiponectin gets derailed, guess what? What did I tell you adiponectin does? It collaborates with insulin to efficiently bring glucose into your system. So when you knock out the adiponectin, insulin is kind of working by itself, not quite as efficiently. Now your glucose levels kind of go up. Now you're heading right down the path of metabolic syndrome, high blood sugar, high blood lipids, high blood pressure, larger waist with visceral fat, and you keep on going down that path, you're going to get to type 2 diabetes. Once you get to type 2 diabetes, you get all the downstream catastrophic consequences of diabetes. Your blood vessels suffer, your circulation goes haywire, you can lose vision because blood vessels go crazy in your eye, your kidneys can fail, your wounds don't heal, you lose nerves, your heart suffers. This is sort of like the train wreck that occurs if you overload on fuel, and all that kind of the domino effect of all the things that can happen. So I'm building this case to tell you that, look, you can work out all you want. You're going to burn some calories. The more active you are, you're going to burn more calories. You're going to burn down more of that fuel. But, if you're overeating day in and day out, week after week, month after month, year after year, which is very common, particularly in countries like America, where the rates of obesity are skyrocketing. And even in countries like China, which never used to have obesity and diabetes, now we're seeing like huge escalating rates of this metabolic disease. A lot of it's actually due to overconsumption. All right. So we're eating too much for our own good, basically. All right. So the good news is that we can burn down that visceral fat. Okay. So how do we do that? Well, remember I told you there's white fat and brown fat. Well, white fat is all good until you have too much of it. Brown fat is something different. So let's talk about brown fat for a second. Don't worry, I'm going to get to the five foods. All right. I just want to set the stage, understanding not just the facts, but not just the what's, but the hows and the whys are actually really important for it to stick in your head. All right. I'm going to give you the foods. Don't worry about it. I'm going to give you foods, but the understanding is really critical. So white fat is wiggly jiggly when you have too much of it. Brown fat is not. Brown fat is wafer thin. It's like paper, and it's not close to the surface. Like, visceral fat is under the skin and then deep inside the tube of your body. No, brown fat is paper thin. It's plastered around your neck, a little bit behind your breastbone, a little bit between your shoulder blades, and a little bit in your belly. All right, you don't need a lot of brown fat, but brown fat has a very particular function. What brown fat does is burn down harmful excess visceral fat. Brown fat, good fat, burns down excess white fat, bad fat, including visceral fat. And that's one of the secrets to actually how to get rid of excess visceral fat, is to activate your brown fat. Now, how does brown fat do this? Well, brown fat is a special kind of fat that undergoes a process called thermogenesis. So brown fat's like a space heater in your body. A space heater like in your college dorm, your feet are cold when you're doing your homework, so you turn it on, generates heat. All right. Another example of what brown fat does, it's kind of like a gas range. If you actually cook on a gas range at home, boil some soup or boil some water for tea, what are you going to do? You're going to turn on the gas. You're going to go click, 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 whoosh. Now you get the flame, and now you can actually boil the water. Well, that's what brown fat does. It'll turn on like a space heater or like a burner on your oven. And in order to be able to generate that heat, like your oven, now your oven, the stovetop, does it by drawing gas from maybe a tank on the side of your house, or maybe gas from the town, right? Now, in your body, the brown fat, click, 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 whoosh, generates heat by drawing the fuel from your visceral fat. Brown fat, good fat, burns down white fat, harmful fat, excess fat, visceral fat, in order to be able to turn on thermogenesis. So this is an interesting way our body controls the amount of energy that we're actually burning down. Okay. Now, why is brown fat brown? Brown fat is brown is if you look under the microscope, brown fat is filled with mitochondria. Mitochondria is sort of like the fuel cell, the nuclear fuel cell in our bodies. It creates energy. You want heat, you want thermogenesis, you need actually these little tiny batteries, the mitochondria, that fire up and can burn down harmful body fat. And mitochondria, which are called organelles, they're like little bits inside a cell, are rich with iron. That's right, the metal, like iron filings, all right, or iron nails. Now, what happens when you take a pile of iron nails and you stick them outside for a week? The silver nails will get brown. They'll rust, they will oxidize. And that's exactly what happens in your mitochondria, the tiny little energy fuel cells in your mitochondria that actually are responsible for the click, 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 whoosh. All right, they're the spark and the generator for the heat, and they draw that energy from your harmful excess visceral fat, but they're filled with iron. And that iron oxidizes, and in the mitochondria, there's a lot of mitochondria, so there's a lot of oxidized iron. And oxidized iron looks like a pile of nails that have been sitting outside, and under the microscope, brown fat, which is wafer thin, looks brown. Brown fat versus white fat. White fat doesn't do it. Brown fat does it. Undergoes thermogenesis. All right. So brown fat burns down white fat. That's a really, really good thing. So let's talk about some of the ways that you can actually burn down visceral fat. One food that actually can burn down visceral fat is coffee. Okay, here, I got a cup of coffee right here. Coffee contains a natural bioactive called chlorogenic acid. It also contains caffeine. It also contains caffeic acid. Now, all of these bioactives, guess what? They turn on your brown fat. They go click, 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 whoosh. And so by drinking coffee, you're actually turning on some of your brown fat, and that brown fat is burning down your visceral fat. In fact, a clinical study of 504 men and women done in Indonesia showed that drinking coffee was linked to lower overall body fat and higher metabolism. Now, we know that caffeine itself will increase your metabolism, right? So, it ramps you up, increases energy. Caffeine makes you more pumped up. But chlorogenic acid also ramps up your metabolism. And actually, they've studied this by looking at decaf coffee and seeing that decaf coffee will also ramp up your metabolism. Now, there's a lot of clinical research around the benefits of coffee and burning down extra visceral fat. A study from the Harvard School of Public Health, for example, looked at men and women who were between the ages of 35 and 69. And these women were overweight and they had insulin resistance, right? That means that their insulin wasn't working so well. I don't know, maybe the adiponectin wasn't actually high enough because the fat was derailed. Nobody measured their adiponectin. But here's what these researchers did. They gave half of the group 4 cups of coffee made with Robusto beans, coffee beans, and they give them 4 cups of coffee to drink every day for 6 months. And if you're saying, oh, I don't know, that seems like a lot of coffee, I can tell you I easily drink 4 cups of coffee a day. These people drank coffee, a cup of coffee, breakfast, mid-morning coffee, I do it all the time, lunch, and they had a coffee after lunch. They did not have it at dinner or after dinner, okay, because that would disturb your sleep, which disturbs your metabolism. So it's really kind of like morning until after lunch, after early afternoon. And the other half of these people in the research study just got a placebo, all right? And at the end of the study, remember, 4 cups of coffee every day for 6 months, coffee versus placebo, they measured their body composition. So they actually did put the people through a scanner to look at where all the fat was. And they also looked at their body weight. And guess what? After 6 months of coffee drinkers, 4 cups a day, shrank their body mass, meaning they shrank their weight by 4.6 pounds. They dropped 4.6 pounds, all right, just under 5 pounds. And they actually shrank their visceral fat just by drinking coffee. Now, what was interesting is that the placebo group, the group that didn't get the coffee, guess what? They were just allowed to eat. I mean, everybody just ate their normal food. The placebo group actually gained 4.4 pounds. So the coffee drinkers lost 4.6 pounds. The placebo group gained 4.4 pounds. Now they separated even more widely. This is due to the chlorogenic acid in the coffee, the caffeine, and the caffeic acid. So drinking coffee is just one way that you can actually take to actually lose harmful visceral fat. Now, coffee isn't the only beverage that can do this. The other beverage that can actually help you lose visceral fat is one of my favorites. Coffee's one of my favorites. But tea is also something that I really enjoy drinking. Green tea, oolong tea, which is a slightly more oxidized tea, black tea like English breakfast tea or Earl Grey tea, which has bergamot in it, or some of the more fermented black teas like pu'er tea or fu brick tea. There's really thousands of different types of teas, but one of the things they all have in common is this polyphenol called catechin, and one of them is called EGCG, epigallocatechin-3 gallate, EGCG. And tea also has some chlorogenic acid, which is what's also in coffee, also has some caffeine, which is also in coffee, and it also has something that is unique to tea called L-theanine, all right? So these are the bioactives that are found in tea, and they actually help to burn down visceral fat as well. Now, I got to tell you the story about tea. If anybody knows how tea was discovered, well, guess what? Go back in time, take the time machine 5,000 years ago in China. This is sort of the legend of the discovery of tea. There was an emperor named Shen Nong, who was drinking hot water. And this is sort of something that in Asia has long been associated with health, is just sipping warm or hot water. All right. And it was said that he was outside drinking hot water out in the wild with his army, the emperor with his army, when the wind blew and accidentally blew one of the leaves from the bushes that were nearby into his water cup. And guess what? That bush was a tea bush, and the leaf that got into the hot water was a tea leaf. And the tea started to steep. In other words, the leaf started to steep in the hot water and release its catechins. Now, of course, the emperor had no idea that it was doing that. All the emperor knew was that it actually made the tea taste better, and he found the beverage was soothing, enjoyable. He liked it. And so what the Emperor Shennong did is he ordered his soldiers, as an emperor is wont to do the same thing and deliberately prepare tea with tea leaves from the wild tea bushes for everyone. All right, so everyone in his group, and hence was born this beverage of brewing tea in hot water. Now, I will tell you that that's the history of tea. Tea has been a big part of the culture of Asian countries. If you go China, Japan, Taiwan, Vietnam, Thailand, Burma, all of those countries, India, you see tea. And of course, the Middle East. I mean, tea is a very much part of the culture of the Middle East. And tea was brought back to Europe, back to England, by sort of in the colonial days, brought back into Europe. Now, so you see, some of the most popular beverages, in fact, coffee actually came. We don't really know where coffee came from Africa originally, but there was an interesting history of coffee, how it actually spread everywhere. Tea has a more discoverable trail of where its history came from. So this is thousands of years ago, like 5,000 years ago. Okay, so this very enjoyable common beverage that's penetrated most cultures has been studied in clinical trial and been shown that drinking tea, clinical studies of tea drinkers actually show that drinking tea burns down harmful extra visceral fat. Fantastic, right? Really good. So let me tell you like an example of one of the studies. There was a study done by a medical school in Iran. It's the Isfahan University of Medical Sciences. They do a lot of food as medicine research. And they looked at 70 women who are in a diabetes clinic with metabolic syndrome. These are women who had a little bit of extra weight, high blood pressure, high cholesterol, high blood sugar. Those are high, big waist size. This is lots of visceral fat. This is the cardinal signs of metabolic syndrome. Again, on your way to type 2 diabetes. And what they wanted to do with these women is to see what the effect of green tea is. So one group of these women were given 1 cup of green tea to drink 3 times a day. In other words, they got 3 cups of tea a day. That's the dose of tea times 8 weeks. 3 times a day times 8 weeks, right? The other group, the other half, only just got a placebo of warm water. And here's what they found. When they actually measured the body weight and they measured the waist circumference. Remember, tube of the body, right? You got a lot of visceral fat. It's growing inside there. It's stretching out the tube, right? That's the beer gut, all right? When you shrink visceral fat, guess what? The circumference, your waist size, contracts, and your tube isn't stretched out as much, right? So at the end of 8 weeks, drinking tea 3 times a day, the researchers found that the tea drinkers lost 2 pounds and they had a smaller waist circumference, about almost an inch, 3/4 of an inch. It's like almost 1 belt hole smaller. And they measured exactly what was being lost, and it was their visceral fat. They lost visceral fat by drinking tea. Now, they also measured other body parameters to see if drinking tea was also helpful for chronic diseases and physiological function, meaning normal body functions. And what they found is that the green tea drinkers also had lower blood pressure, their systolic blood pressure, right? Blood pressure is like 120/70. High blood pressure is 140/90 or higher, the top number or the bottom number being much higher than normal. And it turns out that by drinking tea, the top number actually goes down. That protects you against stroke because high blood pressure increases your risk dramatically of actually dying of a stroke. So lowering your systolic blood pressure, really, really helpful. They also had better fasting blood glucose. So by knocking away and getting rid of their harmful visceral fat, guess what? They actually had better control over their blood glucose. Their insulin was actually working better. And they also had lower blood cholesterol. Their lipids were also better. So for all these risk factors for cardiovascular disease, drinking tea was actually beneficial. Fighting visceral fat is part of it. This is an example of reversing metabolic syndrome by losing visceral fat. All right. So I got some tips for drinking tea for you. All right. How do you actually drink tea? Well, in China and in most parts of Asia, people like to drink whole leaf tea. What I mean is that they're buying tea with just loose leaf tea, and you can put it right into a cup and just pour hot water in it, and you got to let it steep. All right, so you're not drinking it right away. When the tea leaves are steeping, they absorb the water, and they'll actually sink to the bottom, and they'll just be on the bottom, and you just sip the top, and you'll get this nice brew of tea. Of course, you can make tea in a teapot, and the teapot has a place to hold the leaves or filter out the leaves, and so then you're just drinking the pure steeped water as well. All right, that's actually the most common way of drinking tea leaves. It starts with loose leaf tea. If you go to a tea shop and they'll have these big canisters in the back, kind of like behind the counter, and people will bring you the canister, open it up, and ask you how much tea you want, and you can smell the tea to get a sense of the flavor. That's actually how tea is had in many places around the world, like in Asia. Okay, now in America and in Europe, as tea got more, westernized, part of the westernization process is to put tea in tea bags. You very rarely see tea bags in Asia. That's not the typical way, the traditional way of drinking tea. But, in England, you use tea bags. In America, you use tea bags. Tea bags have all the leaves, usually actually not really high quality leaves, like kind of leftover crushed leaves, packed into a bag, and you just steep the tea into some hot water or a teapot and let it brew that way. And then when you're done steeping and the tea's ready, you just throw the bag out. I would recommend that you avoid doing that. And here's why. It turns out that tea bags are either made with nylon, some of the most beautiful tea bags that are shaped like a pyramid. I think it's like a work of art. Like you'd hang it on a Christmas tree kind of ornament, almost like. All right. Those are actually made with nylon. And when you put nylon, that nylon material into hot water, you know what happens? It starts to dissolve. You get microplastics, up to 1 billion particles of microplastics into a cup of tea. Now, I don't need to tell you that's not healthy for you. You don't want microplastics in your tea. In fact, there's been studies done recently by a group in Italy that showed that not only can you find microplastics in your bloodstream, but you can actually find microplastics that come from our food, we breathe it in as well, stuck inside the plaques that narrow our blood vessels, all right? And that's pretty scary. And if you had plaques with plastic stuck in them, microplastics stuck in them, it increased your risk of a fatal heart attack or stroke by 4-fold, 400% increase if there was plastic stuck inside the plaques. So I try to avoid plastics at all costs. It's very difficult to avoid microplastics, but look, things that you can avoid, definitely avoid, and using tea bags is one of the ways you don't. Even the ones that look like they're made with paper or that they are made with paper are often sprayed with plastics on the outside to allow the tea bag to hold together for longer while you're steeping it. So listen, I'm just telling you, do it the traditional way. Sometimes the old ways are still the best ways. And take loose leaf tea, put it into a cup, brew it, let them settle to the bottom, and just sip the top, or put it into a teapot, or put it into a tea ball. You can put the leaves in a ball, close it up, steep it, better than a tea bag, all right? And by the way, if you're actually using loose leaf tea, you could probably brew and add more hot water about 3 times, and you'll still be getting more polyphenols out of it, all right? That's actually a little tip of healthy ways to actually drink tea. The best temperature, by the way, for tea is not boiling. You don't want to boil tea. When I was a kid, I was learning how to make tea. I would actually click, 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 whoosh, boil water, put tea leaves in it. I didn't know. I was just a kid. All right. But it turns out you don't want to be steeping tea at that temperature. The best temperature for brewing green tea is 175 to 180 degrees Fahrenheit. That's under the boiling temperature, 212 underneath. And you can actually buy sort of these hot water tea containers, like tea brewers, and you can set the temperature 180 degrees, and you just hit heat. It'll get it right to that temperature, and then you can just hit a button. It'll actually dispense water of exactly the best optimal brewing temperature. All right. And then what I would recommend, once you make a cup of tea and let it steep, let the tea water cool down before you drink it. All right. You know what it's like, right? You get this really, really hot cup of tea. You start sipping it. Man, it like burns your lips, burns your tongue. You're like, oof, you don't want to let that cool. Okay. And let me tell you that letting the tea cool actually makes a big difference in terms of your health, because drinking very hot tea in gulps actually has been associated with an increased risk of developing esophageal cancer. That's a cancer of the esophagus. Your esophagus is connected to your throat. It's actually from your mouth down to your esophagus, and your esophagus connects to your stomach. You definitely don't want esophageal cancer. That is a really, really difficult to treat, deadly type of cancer. Avoid that. Don't be gulping hot tea or hot coffee, or frankly, any kind of hot boiling beverage. You know that you don't want to be doing it, but I'm telling you the reason why is it sets you up to be at higher risk for esophageal cancer. The other way to actually get the most out of the polyphenols in the tea that are needed to actually help you fight visceral fat, all right, turns on the catechins, turn on the brown fat undergoes thermogenesis, it draws the fuel, brown fat burns down white fat, good fat burns down bad fat. It requires these polyphenols. Now, another little pro tip on how to drink tea is not to use dairy milk. Now, a lot of people actually like to use milk or cream for coffee or tea, like an English tea. You always have like cream for your English tea or milk for your English tea. Don't do it. Not cow milk. And the reason, if you want to optimize your health, and the reason you don't want to do that is that the polyphenols in tea are floating in tea liquid, but when you add dairy milk to it, dairy milk or cream has the dairy fat. The fat forms little soap bubbles, okay? And these little soap bubbles will trap the catechins, the polyphenols in tea, all right? You can't see it, but there are soap bubbles there. When you actually drink it, guess what? The soap bubbles, which are trapping the polyphenols, the good polyphenols, the good stuff, the metabolically active stuff that helps you burn visceral fat, actually tumbles down your stomach and into your intestines, and you don't get a chance to absorb the polyphenols. The soap bubbles taking it right through your intestines, and you're not absorbing the good stuff. You're absorbing a little bit, but you're missing out on most of the best stuff, all right? So if you add dairy to coffee or tea, you're actually missing out on the best part of the polyphenols. It's not optimizing your use of tea. However, if you do want to put something to cut down your tea and make it dilute and give it that kind of milky kind of flavor to it, use a nut milk, like an almond milk or an oat milk or a soy milk. All fine. They don't form those soap bubbles. And so you'll be just fine if you actually use an alternative to dairy milk for your tea. That's okay. All right. Now, so we talked about coffee. We talked about tea. Gave you some tips on the tea. Guess what? Drinking water also helps you fight visceral fat. That's pretty good, because we're all supposed to drink water, right? To stay hydrated. Staying hydrated is absolutely critical for overall health. Look, I don't have to tell you, if you got stuck in a desert and you didn't have water, or you ran out of water, you would be parched, and then you would be dehydrated, and then your kidneys would shut down, and then you would die. All right? But you don't have to get to that state before you actually start already not feeling really well. And so it turns out, quite surprisingly to me initially, that when you drink water, even drinking water can help to fight visceral fat. Now, this has been studied in the clinic. Researchers at the University of Nottingham in the United Kingdom looked at 71 women who were in a weight loss program and who were also overweight. And these were women who, didn't have good diets. For example, they regularly drank diet sodas. Now, what does happen in a diet soda? Diet soda has artificial sweeteners. Those artificial sweeteners damage your gut microbiome. When your gut microbiome, healthy gut bacteria are damaged, it increases your lipids because your blood lipids, your blood cholesterol, because healthy gut bacteria actually help to streamline your metabolism. It disrupts a lot of other processes in your body. It raises inflammation. It's exactly what you don't want to do. And don't forget, these women are already overweight. They had excess visceral fat. Now you damage the gut microbiome. So whatever inflammation was caused by the visceral fat, now you got even more because the gut bacteria is not actually fighting it. And so these women were drinking sodas, and then they took these soda drinkers and they divided the women into two groups. One group were not allowed to drink soda. They were given just regular water to drink. The other group actually kept on drinking the soda. So they followed these women for 12 months, for a year. Women who drank water as their beverage, guess what? Compared to the women who just kept on drinking soda, diet soda, women who just drank water lost 17 times more weight. 17 times more weight than the women who kept on drinking their diet beverage. I'll repeat that. Women who drank water as their beverage lost 17 times more weight than those who drank a diet beverage, right? Diet beverage, no sugars, non-caloric, shouldn't actually cause you to gain weight. But guess what? Because it could damage your gut microbiome, actually it interfered with metabolism. Now, the women who actually had water for their beverage also had lower levels of fasting blood glucose. So they lost weight, they lost visceral fat, they had better insulin performance, they had less insulin resistance, they had more stable blood glucose. So water isn't just for hydration. Water is actually helpful for your metabolism, and it actually helps you lose visceral fat as well. Now, we don't understand exactly how it works, but we think one thing that happens is that stretching your stomach with water makes you feel full. And when you feel full, you're less likely to overeat. So that might be part of it. You stretch your stomach out. It sends signals to your brain, we're pretty full. Even though it's just water, there's no calories in it. You're tricking the brain into thinking that you're more full. You've got more calories than you actually do. So that might be part of it. But there are other ways that we are thinking about this, which is that the water in your stomach, and let's say it's room temperature or even cold water, guess what? Your body has to warm it up. And to warm up your core temperature, that water like inside your belly, your stomach, is cold. It needs to be warmed up. It takes metabolism. Your body has to ramp up metabolism to warm that water. So this was studied by researchers from Humboldt University in Germany, and they took healthy and normal weight men and women. And these men and women were fasting. So they were fasting for like 12 and a half hours. Pretty easy to do if you don't eat anything after dinner and then you wait a while before you eat breakfast in the morning. You can get to 12 and a half hours of fasting. And then what happened is that in the morning, for the subjects, they actually got 2 cups of water to drink. That's all they got, okay? And then the researchers measured their metabolism, and what they found is that within 10 minutes of drinking a cup of cold water, 2 cups of cold water, the researchers who were measuring their metabolism using a process called indirect calorimetry. It's just a technique, a device to actually measure your metabolism. They found within 10 minutes of drinking cold water, 2 cups of cold water, the subjects had their metabolism increase. They did this in the morning because they didn't want food in the body. They wanted fasting, right? So the first thing they got to have is 2 cups of water. Within 10 minutes of drinking water, body's warming up, trying to warm up the water, metabolism increased. Now, that's within 10 minutes. By 60 minutes, guess what, of drinking water, the energy expenditure, the metabolism of the subject increased by 30%. So drink 2 cups of water, within 10 minutes, the metabolism started going up. By 1 hour after drinking just 2 cups of water, your energy, your metabolism increased by 30%. So there's direct metabolic benefits to drinking water. Now, when your metabolism goes up, you're burning down calories, you're burning out some of the fuel, you're burning it from the visceral fat as well, right? So water works by ramping up your metabolism, turning on your metabolism, stretching your stomach walls to make you feel a little bit more full so you're less likely to overeat. And those temperatures in your stomach to warm up the water triggers thermogenesis. And now we're back to the brown fat story, right?
Hello there. Just a quick note. I have another free resource I want to share with you. 5 of my favorite Mediterranean foods to fight fat. Listen, I don't personally follow any special diet, but I do follow a food approach. I call it the Mediterranean way because it brings together the healthiest cuisines from 2 parts of the world that live really long and well, the Mediterranean and Asia. And I put together a list of 5 specific foods that you can add to your plate Mediterranean style so you can optimize your metabolism and fight harmful body fat. Download it for free right now from the description below. Now, back to the video.
So we talked about brown fat versus white fat. And actually, by the way, something interesting that people might not know about brown fat is how brown fat was actually discovered. All right. So if you haven't heard about brown fat, I will tell you the story. Way back in the 1500s, back in the day of discovery biology, all right, this is where naturalists like Darwin and other people were kind of still just exploring things in the wild and studying them under the microscope or drawing them out, right? Old school, but original discovery. Go to the Amazon, take a look at what's there, catch the fish and draw them or look at the birds. Well, okay, so in the mountains of Central Europe, a Swiss naturalist named Conrad Gessner, this was in the 1500s, was studying, he's a naturalist who was studying a rodent called the alpine marmot. Alpine marmot's kind of like a groundhog, okay? And kind of fuzzy, furry, waddles around, lives in the mountains of Central Europe. And guess what? In Central Europe, it gets pretty cold in the winter, it snows, and the alpine marmot will hibernate. So what do hibernating animals do, right? Summertime, they're running around and, in the nice weather. And then it's the fall, they start loading up, right? As you get deeper into fall, they load up more. As you get into winter, animals go they undergo this behavior change where they're stuffing food in their mouths and they're keeping their jowls and they're building up their body fat because they're getting ready to hibernate. So Conrad Gessner was actually studying hibernating alpine marmots. And so he'd catch one of these things and take it back to his lab and open it up and dissect it. This is what, naturalists used to do. And when he was dissecting the hibernating marmot, you know what he found? He found between the shoulder blades this really weird brown lump. It's a brown mass, and he didn't even know what it was. So it was referred to as a hibernoma. Hibernating animal, and oma is like carcinoma, okay? And oma basically means a mass. Didn't know what it was. It's just a brown mass. And later on, other naturalists began realizing that other hibernating animals also had this brown mass. So people were kind of working it out. It wasn't really until the 1930s in the United States, researchers with powerful, much more powerful microscopes were looking underneath it and studying this hibernoma and realized, guess what? It is actually fat. And inside the fat, it's packed with mitochondria. And the mitochondria are like the fuel cells, the energy cell that generates heat. And that it had the capability of being turned on, click, 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 whoosh, to be able to generate heat that way. And this was in hibernating animals. Nobody thought that humans had brown fat, but it wasn't until 2009 when researchers in Boston actually discovered that there was brown fat in adult humans. Now, how did they discover that adult humans had brown fat? And remember, brown fat can burn down white fat. Good fat can burn down bad fat. Okay, the good fat burns down bad fat, excess bad fat, visceral fat. And the way that the Boston researchers discovered this is that they were looking at PET scans. These are special scans that detect metabolism. So whether there's a lot of metabolism, it'll light up. And PET scans were originally developed to study cancer patients, and that's often how they're used today. You want to find a tumor in the body. If you do a PET scan, it'll actually show this area lighting up because tumors are metabolically a lot more active than the rest of the tissue. So you compare normal versus tumor, boom, tumor lights up like a Christmas tree. And what they found in a patient who had what they thought was cancer when they scanned her was a mass that when they did the biopsy and he looked into the microscope, guess what? It wasn't a tumor, it was a hibernoma. It was fat packed with mitochondria that was firing up on the PET scan. Well, that was really interesting because this was one of the first times, early times, where humans were discovered to have brown fat. You know, in the past, they thought maybe children, infants had a little bit of brown fat between their shoulder blades and well, we live in warm, temperature-controlled houses, not in caves anymore. We're not hibernating animals, so we don't really need brown fat. Well, turns out we do need brown fat, and you just don't see it normally. So they went back and they looked at the PET scans for everyone. These researchers did that they did in this hospital in Boston, and guess what? They found some people had brown fat, some people didn't have brown fat. And then they did an analysis, and what they found is that the PET scans that were taken from people during the winter months in New England. So New England's cold in the winter, it snows, it can get pretty cold. Anyone who had a PET scan done during the winter, right, hibernating time, their PET scan showed the brown fat lighting up. Cold temperature causes our brown fat to undergo thermogenesis, click, 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 whoosh, and then our bodies light up. And this is actually how humans, brown fat was actually discovered, and that's where we know where it is. Brown fat's around the neck, a little bit under the breastbone, a little bit between the shoulder blades, and a little bit tucked inside our belly, and that's enough to help us burn down extra fuel from our visceral fat. Okay, and so cold temperatures can actually light up brown fat, the brown fat signal in the skin by about 15-fold. Now, here's something interesting. If both skinny people, lean people, and people who have a lot of extra body fat, overweight or obese people, both have brown fat in their bodies, but the clinical studies have actually shown that people who are lean, skinny people, actually have more brown fat than people who are overweight or obese. Think about that. Now, what came first, the chicken or the egg? Was it more brown fat that led them to burn down more body fat, or is it, that people who overate or had too much overconsumption, their brown fat wasn't working? We don't know, but this is an observation. This is an area of active research, brown fat research. If anybody, young person, wanted to do research today and wanted to look at some very interesting areas about human metabolism, I would direct them to go look at brown fat. Okay, but it turns out it's not just cold temperatures that can activate brown fat. Foods can activate brown fat as well. Things that we eat in our dietary factors. Now, I already talked about coffee. I talked about tea. Those are the chlorogenic acid in coffee and the catechins, the polyphenols in tea. Talked about water. Cold water needs to be warmed up. Turns on your metabolism and turns on brown fat as well. But there are foods that can actually turn on your brown fat. So let's talk about some of those foods. Food number one that can do it, beans. It turns out that beans, like we're talking about white beans, pinto beans, black beans, we're talking about lentils, we're talking about chickpeas, a whole category of beans and legumes. They've been studied for their ability to fire up your metabolism. Now, beans have dietary fiber. The dietary fiber is good for the gut microbiome, so it's all good, all right? And what I think is a really interesting study was done by researchers at the University of Toronto, because they looked at overweight and obese adults, age 35 to 55, right? Like sort of getting into that kind of mature into middle age. And what these researchers did is they gave them 5 cups of canned, ready-to-eat navy beans. This is the kind of stuff you go to the grocery store, you walk into the middle aisle to where they have canned beans, you pick up a can of beans, of white beans, navy beans. I love navy beans, by the way. 5 cups of canned, ready-to-eat navy beans, pre-cooked, all right? And they just gave them 1 cup a day for 5 days. So think about like just during the work week, Monday through Friday, you get a cup of beans, weekends you get off, and they gave it to them for a month. So 4 weeks of having 5 days a week of having 1 cup of beans. They measured they took their body measurements of these subjects at week 1 and at week 4. So this is a 1 month research study, like at time 0, week 1, 4 weeks, to see what happened to the body measurements. And guess what? At 1 month, the women in the study who ate beans, all right, 1 cup of beans 5 days a week, had a 1-inch reduction in their waist circumference. Waist shrank by an inch. That's like 1 belt loop, it's 1 size. And when they actually had their body composition measured by scan, they had a reduction in visceral fat. So eating beans activates your brown fat, reduces visceral fat, all right? And other studies of other legumes also show eating legumes, other types of beans, lentils, chickpeas, improves metabolic control, reduces harmful excess visceral fat, and this lowers the rate and risk of developing chronic diseases, and it also reduces the risk of developing cancer. Beans, simple, inexpensive, delicious. And actually, when you cook beans, when you make a pot of beans, you usually have more than you can eat at one sitting. So guess what? Saves time too, because you got leftovers to eat the next day. All right. Like I told you, I like bean stew. I like bean soup. So many different recipes. I think about like navy beans cooked in a bone broth or vegetable broth, and take rosemary to actually give it an herby taste to it. Absolutely delicious. Have some sourdough bread with it. The sourdough has Lactobacillus reuteri that gives the tang to the bread, good for the gut microbiome. That to me is a really, really satisfying meal. All right. By the way, when you eat beans, it creates a sense of satiety, which means that you feel full. And it lasts long enough so that if you have one meal with beans, like at lunch, you'll still feel kind of full at dinner, and you're more likely not to overeat. So beans help you eat less, help prevent overeating for your next meal. All right, so that's one food that you can eat to turn on your fat and metabolism and burn down harmful visceral fat. Another food that can actually burn down visceral fat are the class of brassica vegetables. Brassica, you probably heard of them. Broccoli, cauliflower, bok choy, kale, cabbage, kohlrabi, Napa cabbage, turnips, collard greens, Brussels sprouts. The things that you'd find in a farmer's market in the spring or the summertime, or go to the produce aisle of the grocery store. It's the green stuff against the wall, all right? And all of these brassica vegetables have a bioactive natural chemical called sulforaphane. Sulforaphane is the natural chemical that's found in brassica vegetables, from broccoli to cabbage to Brussels sprouts. And guess what sulforaphanes do when you eat them? Sulforaphanes get, you chew, you swallow them. Sulforaphanes get absorbed to the bloodstream. Guess what they do? They activate your brown fat. Click, 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 whoosh. Brown fat lights up, needs the fuel. Where does it draw the fuel from? From your excess harmful visceral fat. Brown fat, good fat, burns down white fat, harmful fat, visceral fat. So sulforaphanes do this. Now, how do we know that? Well, there was a study that involved 117,000 people that showed that eating brassica, the equivalent of half a cup of broccoli, had more weight loss due to the burning of white fat caused by the sulforaphane that's found in the brassica. All right, so just a half a cup of broccoli, not very much, actually kind of lit up your metabolism, burned down harmful body fat, and caused them to lose more weight than the people who didn't have the brassica. Now, another study done from Spain looked at 40 overweight adults, and these adults were 35 to 55. So again, same kind of like adult to middle age, young adult to middle age. And they were given a third of a cup of fresh broccoli sprouts. Now, here's the thing about broccoli sprouts. Broccoli has got sulforaphanes, right? All right. Now, broccoli is a big, tall stalk with the treetops. And by the time you buy broccoli in the supermarket or in the frozen section, they chop off usually the big long stalk, and they chop up the florets, or you might chop up the florets at home. Turns out the sulforaphanes are found in the treetops, but the stalk has twice as much of the good stuff. So you want to actually save and cook with the broccoli stalk. That's another pro tip for you. But guess what? That's adult broccoli. Broccoli sprouts, which are just 3 to 4 day old broccolis, baby broccolis, they have 100 times more sulforaphane than the grown-up broccoli. Right? It's like broccoli that is grown, like that when it's actually growing, it's got all it's ever going to have, and then as it gets big, so it's really concentrated in these tiny little sprouts. When it gets bigger and thicker and starts to branch out and create all these florets. It's like it disperses the sulforaphane everywhere. So the sprouts have 100 times more sulforaphane than the adults. And what they did in these 40 adults, overweight adults, is that they got a third of a cup of fresh broccoli sprouts. And after, and they got it every day, blood tests were drawn during the study, and they also collected urine to see if the sulforaphanes in the broccoli sprouts went through the system, and you could find it in the urine. And at the end of 10 weeks of daily broccoli sprouts, just a third of a cup, the broccoli sprout eaters had decreased their body mass by 6%. So just the sprouts decreased the body mass by 6%. And when they stopped eating the broccoli sprouts, guess what? That decrease in the body visceral fat persisted for another 20 days. So there was a long tail to the effect of eating broccoli sprouts. Pretty cool, all right? And when I looked in the blood, remember I told you excess visceral fat causes inflammation. And you can find that inflammation in the blood markers of inflammation. Eating broccoli sprouts lowered the blood markers of inflammation by 38%. So good fat burns down bad fat, draws down visceral fat. The fuel from visceral fat lowers inflammation. It all fits together. It all makes perfect sense. And eating foods can help you burn fat. Who would have thought that you can eat food to actually burn fat? We used to think that you eat food to gain fat. Now there's certain foods we know that can actually burn fat, and we know how they do it. It's actually through brown fat. Now, when I cook brassica, for example, like adult broccoli, one of the things that I actually do, or whether you're talking about broccoli rabe, bok choy, kohlrabi, one of the things I like to do as a little cooking tip, I like to cook it quickly. I like to cook quickly rather than stew it and all that kind of stuff. So what I do with like broccoli is I will boil some water in a pot, like a big pasta pot, or a big wok. You can get it boiled pretty quickly. And when the water's boiling, I cut the broccoli or the brassica into largish pieces. I throw it in the water, turn off the heat. I blanch it like 60 seconds. All right, that's it. And you'll watch the green turn really more and more intense green. You're bringing out the flavors. You're not actually, you're blanching it. You're actually starting to par cook it. You're not destroying the bioactives here. You're not destroying the sulforaphane. Just pull it out. You know you've gone too far and you start to destroy the good bioactives in it when actually the color starts to pale, become wan. Remember, like, when you were in grade school and you went to the school cafeteria and they had broccoli and it was like limp, like, it was completely no substance to it. And the green, it was sort of like army tan green, cactus green, like dusty green, like no flavor, no texture, no good color. That's like when you've destroyed it all right? But if you actually parboil 60 seconds, it turns a bright green, beautiful bright green, pull it out, and then I slice it, and then I'll stir fry it right away, all right? Put it into a blender or whatever I'm going to do. That's actually a trick to preserving the bioactives, the sulforaphanes, while actually cooking, par cooking the brassica vegetables. All right, so third food we're going to talk about are carrots. Carrots are food everybody knows, the bunny rabbits eat carrots. Carrots did not originate in America. It did not originate in Europe. Carrots originated in Southwest Asia, all right? And the earliest carrots were not orange. They were not orange. Guess what? They were purple on the outside and yellow on the inside. Purple on the outside, yellow on the inside of the original carrot. And in fact, if you go to farmers markets today, and sometimes in the grocery store, you'll see these like heirloom carrots, and you'll see some purple carrots. And if you broke it open, and look inside the middle, you'll see that the inside of the purple carrot is actually yellow. That's the original carrot, all right? And the outside has anthocyanins. That's what the natural dye that makes the purple carrot, purple on the outside, purple. Blueberries is the same thing that causes blueberries and blackberries to actually have their characteristic bluish color, purplish color. That's found in the carrots. And anthocyanins also turn on metabolism, help turn on brown fat to burn down, to undergo thermogenesis to burn down white fat. So that's a good thing. But orange carrots also work. Orange carrots are packed with carotenoids. Carotenoids like lutein and zeaxanthin also can turn on brown fat thermogenesis as well. So how did the purple carrot turn into the orange carrot? Well, the legend goes in the 1600s in the Netherlands, Dutch farmers began to breed carrots to be orange. They went from purple to orange, and they found the orange ones, and they kept on deliberately breeding them until they got mostly orange carrots to celebrate a hero named William of Orange, who freed the Netherlands from Spanish rule. This is actually the lore, the legend of why orange carrots became orange. Well, look, carrots not only have these carotenoids that can turn on brown fat, but they're also a great source of dietary fiber. Dietary fiber is good for your gut microbiome. Your gut microbiome actually helps to streamline your metabolism. All good for overall enhancing your metabolism. And carrots also contain chlorogenic acid, which, as we know, like in coffee, burns down visceral fat. Carrots also have beta-carotene and beta-cryptozanthin. Beta-cryptozanthin is a specific carotenoid that, guess what, increases thermogenesis in brown fat, and that burns down harmful body fat. All right. Clinical studies have been done on carrots, like at the University of Medical Center in Utrecht in the Netherlands. Researchers looked at 374 middle-aged and elderly men. These are people anywhere between the ages of 40 to 80. Right, so adults to elderly people, and looked at how many foods from the carotenoid with beta-cryptozanthin, like carrots, they were eating. And they also measured the subject's metabolic parameters, like what are their metabolic things. Things like waist circumference, body fat distribution, insulin levels, blood cholesterol, all the things you look for to do a metabolic workup in the medical clinic. Here's what they found. The researchers found that those people who ate the equivalent of only three medium-sized carrots a day had a 58% reduced risk of developing metabolic syndrome. Just eating the equivalent of 3 medium-sized carrots reduced the risk of developing metabolic syndrome by 58%. That's huge, all right? And by the way, that's by reducing visceral fat and turning on thermogenesis, all right? So that's really, really, really amazing. Now, here's a little side tip for you about eating carrots. Obviously, eat the orange carrot, or if you can get an heirloom carrot, like a purple carrot with a yellow middle, eat the carrot, of course. It's called the taproot. That's the stuff underground. But I've done research with my team at the Angiogenesis Foundation, and we compared the health benefits of the taproot, the orange part, with the carrot top, the green part. Now, if you go buy carrots at a farmer's market, you'll see there's about this much carrot and there's a huge amount of green top. So usually you cut off the green top, throw it away. We were actually studying the carrot tops to see what they could do. And guess what we found? Carrots were actually good for health. They actually good for your blood vessels. They help to improve blood vessel health. But the carrot tops were twice as beneficial. All right. So don't throw your carrot tops. I don't know, make a salad out of it. Make a pesto out of the carrot tops. Search carrot top or carrot greens on Google and put recipe, type video, hit video, and watch somebody teach you how to make some really interesting things out of carrot greens or carrot tops. All right, so that's something you should actually know. I like to roast carrots. I think roasted carrots taste really good, and you can actually add different kinds of spices, some turmeric or cumin that you spice it up. Want to sweeten it? You can add just a touch of maple syrup on roasted carrots. I like to eat that. You can actually add coriander to carrots, different type of spices. Give it a try. Carrots are really good for you, good for dietary fiber, good for carotenoids, good for metabolism. That's sort of like what I'm recommending that you actually try doing. Okay, so that's it. How to use food as medicine in order to be able to burn down harmful visceral fat. I'll have more tips for you in another video on other ways to actually burn down fat and metabolism. I write about all of this in my book, Eat to Beat Your Diet. It's not a diet book. It's actually an anti-diet book because it teaches you how to fire up your own metabolism and fire up your brown fat to burn down harmful excess body fat and gain health. And guess what? You can do it by eating delicious foods. Hope you learned something new, and thanks for watching. I'll catch you in another video.
Hi there. If you enjoyed watching this video, I know you'll love the next one. Stay here and check it out, and I'll see you there.